Hey everybody, Scott Freymuller and Shelly Netco back here on the Mental Knot. We were just talking about doing an intro and how maybe we didn't need to do it, and Rock and Robin was like, "Yeah, but dude, you're on the audio platform too, without video." So they're like, "You gotta." So then they're like, "What the hell are you guys talking
People
about?"
just start talking.
So I mean, what
Here
are
we
we
are.
talking about, right? Like,
We're like,
I don't
hello?
even know sometimes.
Hello, is this thing on?
I know. So today we're going to talk about abandonment and how that relates to relationships, mental health, sometimes your career, all kinds of different things, right? So clearly you're smarter than me for many reasons.
No, I don't know about that.
So let's why don't you start off with that? Get us going.
So the reason I wanted to talk about this is because I had just a recent resurgence, I would say, a situation come up, and I was feeling that just triggered, that abandonment trigger, and I really had to dig into it. And in doing so, wow, even just talking about it makes my heart race. So in doing so, that led me to attachment styles.
Okay.
And we've talked about those. And where my abandonment first started, which may or may not make sense to anybody who witnessed my life, which is fine because it's my perception and it's where I was, my experience. Yours, is when I was young and just not feeling that some of those needs were met, or, emotionally. So in being in that space, I spent my relationships chasing that feeling of not feeling abandoned.
Okay.
If that makes sense. So chasing validation, chasing feeling seen.
Because you think if you had a validation
connected.
and you were seen, then you wouldn't be abandoned. Like you wouldn't be by yourself.
Right. I spent my relationships chasing that sense of feeling connected and was kind of anxious about it. So it's like if, say, a mom and a child or a mom and her toddler are in a room, and the mom leaves the room and the toddler kind of freaks out, which is okay to do it for a few seconds. Yeah. But if they continue to do it and it's inconsolable kind of a thing, and I'm talking like maybe a 4-year-old, whatever, who can clearly self-soothe at that point and clearly self-manage. And if that's still a thing, then that's sort of an anxious attachment demonstration. So the ideal place that we all want to be is not like that, and we want to be in that secure place which means I'm good alone.
Then you can't be abandoned.
Exactly. Or there's no connection to abandonment, meaning fear.
Right.
So then what I went through, what this experience was, which was the most simplistic but it's something that just triggered abandonment, which was just not feeling, I guess, a sense of connection with someone who I was normally connected with. And it was because of circumstances. But to me, it was like, ooh, what is that? Abandonment, here it is. It's like, oh shit, there you are. And I had to get to this place where it's like a bridge between your childhood toddler self who was anxious and fearful in a situation like that versus now. So I was on the bridge, and I had to get myself to this place where it was like, okay, what is true now? Am I being abandoned?
And then not be in your child's mind, right? Like,
and not being in my child's mind.
Because most of these emotions are based on being in your child's mind because they're not rational.
Just like what we talked about on the last show, which was that anger or conflict or whatever it is, and you go back to that behavior or response because your nervous system and everything is everything
like you're accustomed to
it's all stored, and your response is what it was before. So of course my trigger takes me back. And so I had to walk myself into what the truth was, and it took some time. Right. It was a day, but not a big deal. But it was some time. It was processing. It was understanding. It was doing a little reading. It was sitting with myself and really getting my arms around it, honestly.
Yeah. There's an abandonment too with healing, or with counseling or whatnot. And I've had recently some experience and calls about folks with PTSD, and whatever they leave, the department or whatever it is, a lot of times what happens is when people leave the department, like say they get a medical or the military for a medical or whatever, then it's like an abandonment issue. That too. One is identity, right? Like they lose their identity. But the second thing is they're not part of that team anymore, and they're not part of that group. And if people aren't reaching out and still including them like in events and stuff like that, that's a huge abandonment issue, right? Because they're still healing. They don't have all the tools, and they don't have, I mean, I hate to say it, but self-worth really to be able to deal with that. And that, I think that can happen. Like even, people think like even from an executive level, right? Like say you're a CEO, like Lee. If he leaves his position, he's not, in charge anymore.
Right.
And there's abandonment issues in that too, right? Like, okay, I was here in this position of essentially power, and then you leave that position of power, and then you're like, oh, nobody like calls me anymore.
Yeah, it's
nobody,
you know what I'm saying? It's that loss of identity with it too.
That's an abandonment thing too. And there's some emotion with that, right? Like that's an okay response. Now, if it lasts for weeks and months and years, that's an issue, right? But I think that's okay. Like it's okay to feel that.
Right.
But then rationalize it, like you said, like you got to cross that bridge and get to a spot where you're in a healthy place.
Right.
But there's lots and lots of ways where that happens. We talked about dating. That's another one where you're like, hey, you know what? This isn't really what I'm looking for. Oh, mother, what the fuck?
Yeah.
No. That's an abandonment issue. That's
or
like,
ghosting or blocking.
Yeah, just be like, hey, okay, thanks for telling me. Like, thanks for not dragging this on for, months or years or whatever. Like, thanks for telling me what's up, instead of being manipulative or being toxic or whatever, I actually told someone a while back, I was like, hey, if this works or doesn't work, it's going to be healthy.
Right.
Like we're going to tell the truth. At least I am. I'd be transparent, and I'm just going to let you know, and that's a good thing. That's a healthy thing. But that abandonment, it encompasses so many things, and you're right. It puts you back in your child's mind.
It does.
But the thing I think lots of people miss is that concept.
Yeah.
Is that it happens all the time.
Right. Because the trigger tells you the sky is falling and the world is falling apart.
Right.
Because that's what it was doing.
And whatever's happening, I'm not part of it.
Sure.
And that sucks. Because we all want to be included. We all want to be part of something, right? That's like our natural, like we're pack animals,
Right.
Like we all want to be part of the community, But yeah, like being invited to parties or, like when Ava gets married, if you're not invited, that's an abandonment. Right?
I think about Ava getting married. She's turning 5.
I know, but it's going to happen.
I know.
She's so cool. Yeah. So, but it goes back to that, right?
Yeah.
Or like if Rock and Robin didn't want to sit here and help us with our show, I'd feel abandonment.
Like, where's Robin? What's that?
Bullshit.
Yeah.
We're kidding, but that's actually, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And I think that people need to realize that your words are powerful sometimes, and they can cut, and your actions are the same.
The other thing with abandonment, as you say that, is it's okay, so think about your words. So as soon as something happens that triggers your abandonment, you start telling yourself a story. And then
you make shit up.
And that creates some thoughts and emotions.
It does, yes.
And so I'm talking about your response. I'm not talking about the reality of a situation, right? So your words, then your thoughts, your emotions, and everything. And once that starts, then you start forming this reality in your head about the whole situation.
Right.
So reality in your mind, and you've got all this energy going around it.
Right.
And if you allow that to take over, and you're not headed in the right direction with it,
right,
that can become you, and that can become the whole scenario, and that can
become your personality.
It can, it can definitely become your personality. But in that situation, with that sense of abandonment, with whatever's going on, with that trigger and that rejection and everything, that can change how all of it goes. And with some people, it goes really horrible directions. You know, that's where domestic violence, like all kinds of horrible things happen.
Well, cheating's a form of abandonment too, right? Like you're abandoning your partner to go.
You're abandoning yourself.
Be with somebody else. Absolutely, you're abandoning yourself.
Yes.
Yeah. More so, you're abandoning yourself, right? Like we've talked about that so many times, but that's a huge form of abandonment on both sides.
Right.
Like if you're cheating, you have an issue, right? Like just tell your partner, hey, I'm not in, or whatever. But just the lie itself's abandonment, right? You're abandoning everything. Yes. Values, yourself, the person you're cheating with, your partner, your family. Like you're lying to everyone at that point, you know. And that's just, oh my gosh, what a snowball crap show that's going to be, you know. But it's funny how abandonment relates to so many things that are even like outside of what we normally think, right? Like even the CEO example we used, or a job, or but there's abandonment in all kinds of different things.
There is,
you know.
Yeah.
You know, one of the things I saw the other day was this gal walked into a restaurant and she had 2 of her kids and one of her kids with special needs, and kind of loud and, you know, making noise and stuff. And the couple next to the table asked if they could move because the kid was so loud, you know. And you could see the gal was like, man,
Wow.
you know, like, because she's already dealing with a bunch of stuff and 2 kids and on her own and trying to eat and, you know, the whole thing going on. And then these people are like, hey, man, like, these people are too loud and too obnoxious and we just want to move, which I kind of get. But still, like, the actions can hurt, too. They didn't say anything mean to her, but she knew what was going on, right? Like, they just got their food and they're moving. So, you know, it's just one of those things where that abandonment, you know, or that feeling can be from so many different things.
Just
and you may not even really
rejection.
pay attention to it. But that's a form of rejection too.
Yeah, it comes in so many forms.
Yeah. Or like, hey, you want to go out? And you're like, no. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But that's okay too, right? That's rejection,
Sure.
abandonment, whatever.
Sure.
But just having that self-worth and those tools, right? That's an interesting, powerful thing too. You know?
And as you told that story, and what that brought up and made me think of is some people think that the only way that we become this way, I guess, which is a silly way of saying it, is because maybe mom didn't pay attention to me or dad didn't show up at my football games or whatever. But that's not it. It could be a situation like that where one child is sick and requires more attention and that kind of thing. So the other child maybe feels maybe they might feel slighted, or they might just find themselves, maybe it makes the mom more anxious, and then the other child picks up on the mom's anxious behavior. And that plays out in the family scenario. And then the child who picks up on all that and becomes hypersensitive to it, then they're the one who moves along through life. And they're like, oh, wait, I recognize that. I recognize that. And then they might gravitate towards that kind of a relationship where that anxiousness feels like home.
Yeah.
And
that can become a habit too, right?
Absolutely.
Like that can become like part of your toxic response and your trauma bond or whatnot, you know, because you actually get used to that treatment, you know. Some people think they deserve it, like, you know, the shame or whatever. And I think that's where the, you know, we say that trauma bond or whatever, or you get back to that narcissism or whatnot. You know, there has to be somebody weak, right? For somebody to feel abandoned, I mean, essentially you're in a weak place, which is okay and normal.
Right.
Like you can't be perfect and strong every day, all day long, right? Like everybody's gonna have that feeling. But it's like what you do with it and then why.
Sure.
You know, like, okay, how come I'm feeling this way? Is it because I'm being treated poorly? Is it because I'm shameful? Is it because I think I deserve it? Is it because, you know, am I in the wrong area? Like, do I really not want to fit with these people? Because sometimes abandonment and rejection is okay.
Yeah.
Like you want to be rejected by some people because you don't fit.
Right.
You know, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. Right.
My friend has a quote. Actually, Brenda, she's told me, she says, man's rejection is God's protection.
I saw that online or something somewhere.
Yeah. And I mean, sometimes it's very true.
Yeah. And you know, you change it from a person.
Yeah.
It's a person's rejection, right? You know, it's funny, and I hate to say it like this, but a lot of times, you know, you see all these things online where it's always men that are the perpetrator, and it's not always like that.
Nope.
It's
you know?
not.
And who's the guy that was just
You're talking about Johnny Depp and Amber Heard?
Yes.
Yeah.
That's gnarly.
Yeah.
Like, who would think Johnny Depp could be in a position like that? Like, what the
I mean, regardless,
maybe we're not even allowed to say that, right? Like, I have no comment. I don't know what happened.
No, I'm just saying,
Jesus.
I was just thinking as you were saying it, regardless, the story is wackadoodle.
Yeah. Like, it sucks,
She
right?
crapped in his bed.
Yeah.
Literally.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just weird.
Yeah. And you know, so, but, you know, you say those things, right?
Yeah.
And like, okay, really, how much of that is true? Like, really, what happened with this, right? And we're all judging, like everybody, you know, I see it on Facebook, I see it on the news, I see it everywhere, right? We hear it on the radio. My gosh, we're talking about it right now on a show. We don't even know what do we know about what really
I just
happened?
heard about it, like, probably a month after it started.
And that goes back to
the
that.
other day.
So number one.
Because I don't pay attention.
Right, now we're talking about flying monkeys, right?
Yep.
We're talking about all kinds of things that we don't really know what we're talking about.
Sure.
But we're just listening to things or reading things or like, hey, I saw this on this and this was this person's opinion or whatnot. And that's the where we get into the unhealthy piece.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's that kind of stuff. It cracks me up a little bit. You know?
I know.
But you think, regardless, there's a legal issue there. They're in a lawsuit, a divorce, or whatever they're doing, and you're like, how did somebody like that get in a position?
Well, but how did the whole thing get that bad? And it's again, somebody felt rejected, somebody felt abandoned, somebody couldn't handle conflict, somebody couldn't have an honest conversation.
Yeah.
And
Right. And
There
then
you
you're
go.
like,
Perfect storm.
Here we go. Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, it's interesting. So here's another thing too. There's abandonment in promotion too, right? Like when I, say the three of us, Rock and Robin, myself, and Shelly, we're all interviewing for a position, and one of us gets chosen, the other two don't, because you always wonder why.
Sure.
Like, how come I wasn't chosen?
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's important in the corporate world to identify that also. And
Yeah.
even like when we do a hiring, we always let people know, like, hey, you didn't get the position. Oh, well, why? Oh, you know what? You just didn't seem like a fit for us.
Yeah.
And I know you can't say certain things,
Yeah.
right? But I think in an organization, especially if you're part of that organization, I think it's fair to give somebody like an interview after. Like, that's part of the thing we miss too. Like, hey, how come I wasn't chosen? Well, you know what? You really had a difficult time interviewing, and here's some of the questions you didn't answer really well, and here's some stuff to study for next
Here's
time.
some feedback.
So here's some feedback, right? Like, why wouldn't you do that?
Like what they do at the end of American Idol when someone tries out. I used to watch that back in the day.
Did you? They give them feedback?
Yeah. So as soon as they would try out, and they would tell them what they needed to do if they want to come back.
That's super cool.
But that's how they used to do it.
And I think
when Haley was 12.
Yeah, but from a mental health standpoint and a conflict resolution, like, think of what you'd be doing for the team of folks that you're working
Yeah.
with to give them the feedback. If you know what I mean, even the people that succeed, like,
Sure.
hey, we gave you this position, and here's where you can improve.
Right.
I know that's time consuming and whatever, and maybe there's a little HR issue with that, but I think it's really important. Like, if you want to have an organization that's going to grow and become better, well, then you need to give them the feedback, but also identify that abandonment of not getting the promotion or position or whatever, whatever. You know what I mean? But there's a huge element there too, so that applies to lots of things, not just relationships, but everything in the workplace. And, like, you go to a bar or whatever, like I was saying, or a restaurant, and people get up and move, or, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, the hell's that about?
You know what this made me think about is we were talking a long time ago about dating. And
What do you mean a long time ago? We talk about dating every day.
Okay, no, one show we were talking about dating, and we were talking about being on a date with somebody that you are not enjoying, like a first date with someone you're not enjoying. And I was describing a scenario, and I was like, yeah, it's just like, oh, it's gonna be a long hour. And I sat there with this guy, and then we had drinks, and then all of a sudden he's ordering food, and I was just like, oh my gosh, are you kidding me? I just want to go home. And you said, why don't you leave? Why don't you just leave? And I said, because he's a human being, and
You could say, hey,
he deserves respect.
I just
and-
have time for a drink today.
Well,
or
I know,
something.
but in my head, I was like, well, I don't want to trigger this guy's abandonment or rejection issues.
But that's not your issue, really.
It's
As
not
long as
your-
you're honest with
To
them.
me, it was.
It's not
Yeah.
your responsibility.
Well, but it was to me. I
Right,
don't know.
But I think if you're honest and you give them feedback, you just be like, hey, you know what? I just came for a drink. I didn't really have time. And, I see us not in a romantic
Right.
place.
Right. And this was a
If he's-
long
if
time
he's
ago.
abandoned, yeah, then-
but the way it ended up was, even though I sat there, and at the end, and then he said something about going out again, I was like, no, I don't think so. And then he got all mad.
Right.
So
'Cause
either
he has
way,
abandonment issues.
either way, he would have got
So you read
mad.
the situation
Exactly.
correctly. Yeah.
Yeah,
Or you
I
can
read
text
it
them later,
right.
be like, no, I don't think there's going to be number 2.
Yeah.
Peace. Yeah. yeah.
Exactly.
Block, ghost, whatever.
Why I don't date.
But no, I mean, I think the tools are important. And that says a lot too.
Yes.
Right? Like, if you're in that place and you're honest with somebody and you're
Sure.
transparent the way you should be, and they have a bad reaction to it, well, that's not about you. It's about them.
True.
That's not your issue.
Absolutely true.
Yeah. Because, I mean, I'd be like, hey, thanks. Like
Yeah.
I said before, I'd be
Or like
thank
people
you.
are like, fine, go be an asshole.
And that's happened to me before. Has it ever happened to you? Mm-hmm. Like once maybe, but yeah, right? It doesn't happen often. But I'm saying when it does, you can handle that.
Sure.
Like, you have the tools for that.
Sure.
Yeah, you're like, oh, thanks.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be like, oh, why don't you like me?
Yeah.
I'd be like, okay, cool. Like, whatever.
Yeah.
I guess the growth part too is, when we talk, we always go back to the dating things. That's essentially what part of the show's about, or most of it's about dating and relationships and red flags.
Sure.
But it goes back to that deal, when we're online, that example I used earlier about, hey, if you're not this, political affiliation, and you're not, this religion, and you're not this tall and this deal, and that's a form of abandonment too, and
Sure.
rejection,
Yeah.
right? Like, if you're not going to be like me, dude, ain't happening. That's an interesting concept too. Like, that's another form
Right.
where, and the interesting thing is, it's not about you. It's not about you. Like, if somebody doesn't want to be around, that's not about you. It's about them. Like, okay, cool.
Right.
Like, let it go. You know
Yeah.
what I mean?
Yeah.
So, and having that good support group. I think what this mostly comes down to is having like a good support system of healthy people around you, or at least people that are like-minded somewhat, so that you can have that support, Like, you know, the other day I had an event happen. You had an event happen. You're like, dude, I had a rough day. I'm like, shit, I did too. And then we, you know, throw some stuff around, you know what I mean? But that's a support in itself, right? Like, oh my God, I'm so sorry you had a hard time or whatever, you know? That's
Well, and having the resilience too, because I think when people allow themselves to continue through situations where they don't build that resilience, you know, they dodge it, or like you say, you know, they numb it and they do this and then they take all these turns to run from it, or they don't, you know, sit with it and figure out what the real issue is, what's underneath of it, what's making them feel a certain way. They're not building resilience. So then the next time something happens, then they're not going to do better, or, you know, they're not going to get through it in a healthy way maybe, or in a way that doesn't hurt someone. Who knows?
Yeah, and you can abandon old habits too. When you were saying that, it popped into my head. I'm like, we're drinking water now. Did you realize that? We used to drink wine and alcohol. We did.
We drank.
And so we abandoned that.
At the end of the day, we would drink a glass of wine on our last show. And in reality, that's not actually, now when I look back. We weren't doing it to get drunk.
We weren't doing it to get drunk.
Let's have a glass of wine
or whatever.
Yeah.
And that's okay. Like, there's nothing wrong with that, but I wouldn't do that now.
No.
Right? Like, I abandoned that idea.
Me too.
So you can abandon like that idea too. And I did it. I didn't actually do it consciously, I guess.
No.
It was part of like my
it
involvement.
Yeah, it
you know,
evolved
in
for
this
both
too,
of us.
right? Like,
Absolutely.
if anywhere I want to be as present as I can be, it would be here, right? Because I say enough stupid shit when I'm sober. Like, can you imagine if I was, you know what I mean, intoxicated? I'd be like, blah, 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 like, you know, whatever. Worse than I am now. The interesting thing though is that's a form of abandonment too. You know, you're abandoning your past and your old self, and you're evolving into something different.
Sure.
And that's like a good abandonment.
Yeah,
right?
you have to be willing to do that.
Sure.
And that's that vulnerability.
And sometimes, you know, like, this is against all my beliefs, like my romanticism and my romantic, you know, red rose belief. But sometimes you need to abandon your old stuff.
Yes.
Like, sometimes you need to walk away.
Yes.
You need to know when to fold them. You know what I mean?
Know when to hold them.
Know when to hold them. Know when to fold them. Know when to walk away. Know when to run.
Know when to run.
You know? And that's abandonment thing too. You know.
I feel like 50 Ways to Leave Your Lovers coming next.
Yeah. Right.
Slip out the back, Jack.
We could sing that whole thing, right? But no, I think that's a good. I think that's a good discussion on that. Yeah.
Yeah.
You cool?
Absolutely.
All right. Everybody, thanks for watching Shelly Netco on the Mental Knot and Scott Freymuller. Have a great day.